So imagine, if you will, your own understanding of and interpretation of the Tower of Babel. What was it? Who was building it? Why were they building it? What happened when God judged them for what they were doing? What was the result of God's judgments? Think about it for a moment. Do you have it? Do you have it in your mind, the way you understand the tower right now? I'm going to present something here. It'll seem uncomfortable at first, but hang with me, because there's a very satisfying ending. Problem number 1. Driver, when speaking on the Table of Nations, has this to say. The table does not include all nations known to the Hebrews. Some, which were more closely connected with the Hebrews than any here mentioned, as Moab and Ammon, the descendants of Nahor and of Keturah, the Ishmaelite tribes, and Edom, are intentionally excluded. They find their place at later stages of the narrative. Others, as the Rephaim, the Anakim, the Zuzim, are perhaps not mentioned as not being of sufficient importance. For the omission of others, it is less easy to suggest satisfactory reasons. That's very true. I'll bring that up again later in the video. Others, again, as the pre-Semitic Sumerian inhabitants of Babylonia, the Negro races of Africa, many nations of Europe, the Indian races, the Chinese, and the peoples of Australia, America, the Pacific Isles, and etc., are not mentioned simply because the knowledge of the Hebrews did not embrace them. So this is problem number 1, facing the traditional interpretation. Remember this. The table does not include all nations known to the Hebrews. Problem number 1. Does your view of the tower explain this problem? If not, don't worry. I'll explain it to you at the end of the video. Let's go to problem number 2. Upon what principle are the nations included in the table arranged? No doubt the two writers whose joint work the table in its present form is, both conceive their arrangement to be ethnological. That is, they suppose the nations to be really related by blood as they represented them to be. But though this was doubtless the case in some instances, in others it is not probable, and sometimes linguistic and other facts known to us show it to be altogether out of the question. The Canaanites, for instance, had certainly no direct racial connection with Egypt, nor the Hittites with Canaan, or with the Amorites, nor Elam with Shem. Where a blood relationship cannot be presupposed, the principle of arrangement, it seems evident, was chiefly geographical, though sometimes it was historical or political. Thus, the three main divisions, Japheth, Ham, and Shem, occupy respectively on the whole a northern, middle, and southern zone. So this is the second problem. Does Driver's criticism here raise problems with what you believe about the tower? If so, and if you can't figure out the answer, then I'll give you the answer at the end of the video. Now, I like giving things in threes when I can, so let's give a third problem, shall we? A third problem indeed. That the narrative can contain no scientific or historically true account of the origin of different languages is apparent from many indications. In the first place, if it is in its right position, it can be demonstrated to rest upon unhistorical assumptions. For the biblical date of the flood, see the introduction, section 2, is BC 2501, or, according to the Septuagint, BC 3066. And, so far from the whole earth being at either BC 2501 or BC 3066, of one language and of one set of words, numerous inscriptions are in existence dating considerably earlier, even than BC 3066, written in three distinct languages: the pre-Semitic Sumerian or Akkadian, the Semitic Babylonian, and Egyptian. See this Egyptian hieroglyphic writing? See how it's right at like 3200 BC. We have Egyptian hieroglyphic writing on pottery shards and clay seals dating as early as 3200 to 3400 BC. And I put it in at 3200 BC, right here. Now, as you can see, this is well before the Tower of Babel, which I have at 2334 BC. Okay? Now, in Driver's comment, he was talking about how if you follow the Septuagint, the tower is more like back in here, 3066. But these Egyptian hieroglyphics come from earlier than that. You see that? And like Driver said, I'm pointing at an Egyptian here, but he mentions that there's also Sumerian cuneiform and so forth. So we have multiple languages existing before the Tower of Babel. Written languages. So at this point, you might be thinking, boy, we've got some huge problems. What do we do? We don't have huge problems. The only problem we have is misinterpretation. That's all there is, and I'll explain why. The answer, and I've already gone over this in the video, Mike and the Tower. And some people were complaining on my other video where I was talking about how important the tower is. They were saying things like, where's the evidence?
Where's the beef?
And stuff like that. And they missed the video I was talking about, Mike and the Tower. And I already go over this in that video, but this is so important, folks. I can tell from some of the comments that the light bulb hasn't come on for some of these people. And it's so important. I want that bulb to come on. So I'm going to explain it again here, and hopefully you can see it. Because once you see this, you've unlocked a huge part of the Bible. See that key in the bottom right corner of the screen? There's a reason it's there. And the Tower of Babel is the biggest unlocking I can share with you. And I want the light bulb to come on. So what we have in all of this is, in churchendom, there's a misinterpretation of the tower, of what it was, and of what happened originally. And once you understand the answer, you're going to be a pre-Adamist. You're going to see that pre-Adamism is obviously the meaning of all of Genesis. So, first of all, I highly recommend you download my free book. And on page 7 of the book, all of these answers are provided. It's going to take some thinking on your own part, but I really want you to see it for yourself. And when that bulb comes on, you'll know you're right. You'll just know it. You'll see what I mean. So this is page 7 from the book. And I want to start off by quoting this area here in the top left. Where you will find this note. We now arrive at the ultimate proof to the pre-Adamic exposition of the Holy Bible. At the Tower of Babel, the one lip of the Adamic people was mingled with the tongues of surrounding peoples, and families were separated or divided among those peoples per the ascribed toponyms. All these people in the table already existed. And the Adamic clan was fractured apart and allotted to these nations. Is it starting to make sense? Are you starting to see some answers to problems? I can prove all of this is the right interpretation. Let's keep going. Just below this, we find this note. Why it matters. The creation, the paradise, the giants, and the flood were all well known by all the ancients and by the Hebrews themselves, even before they met any prophet named Moses. These ancient memories were preserved among those peoples whom had been allotted an Edenic family, and cultures interacting with one another engenders widespread knowledge of all the myths and all varieties. The people groups in the Table of Nations certainly believed in a creation, a paradise lost, giants, and a flood, and so forth. But they had their own distorted versions of it. So Moses included the people in the table who definitely shared these memories. And the reason they had these memories in common is because they had received Edenic families into their histories, into their civilizations. The Pentateuch contains the real truth of what happened so long ago, providing correction to the blurred representations in shared cultural myths. The Pentateuch shows the loss of paradise, a world of many gods, and Yahweh becoming a God to a new people of choice, so as to restore paradise and thereby bring blessings to the whole earth. It's absolutely essential to proper exposition of the book of Genesis that one understand the tower event. Here's 2 points that are necessary to understand. Number 1, the one people were separated apart and allotted to various peoples already living on the earth. Not all peoples of the earth were allotted an Edenic family. See flag B. I'll explain that in a moment. Point number 2, these peoples were designated nations and set under the authority of an angel. For example, Peleg and family allotted to the god Ru, and etc. See the Baal symbol. Now, concerning this flag B, and what I say here, does this look familiar? Does this maybe look like a criticism from Dr. Driver? Remember from problem number 1 how Driver was trying to explain why certain people weren't in the table? And that's a problem for the traditional view, because the table's supposed to explain where all the people of the earth came from, right? With their languages and so forth. But that's not what it is. That's not what it's about, and it can't be what it's about. But Driver was trying to explain why some of the people may not be there. And remember how he said, as for the omission of others, it is less easy to suggest satisfactory reasons. And I said, yes, very much so. And I'll get back to that later in the video. Remember that? Well, on page 7, right in the middle, you'll find this map that shows all the people from the table, all the ones that we can identify who are mentioned in the table are numbered here on the map. But there's some very important people missing. But first of all, notice the gold lettered numbers in the middle here. That corresponds with something very important, the Abrahamic covenant. And right here, we find an important passage. And let me zoom in here. This is when God promises the land to Abraham and his descendants. But some of the peoples mentioned are not represented in the table. They're not mentioned. And that's a huge problem, because this is very early in the Genesis narrative. This essentially follows on the heels of the Tower of Babel, when you have Abraham called down into Canaan. Well, why then do we right away find people that aren't in the table? That's the big question. It's a big question that needs an answer. Well, the traditional exposition can't answer it, but my view can.
And believe me, folks, I don't say stuff to shock you. I say what I really believe and what I know. So you better listen to me.
Let me read for you the primary note here in the center top of page 7 in my book. And again, you can download my book for free. It's free, okay? For a moment, the clan surprisingly lost all ability of communication. Then, as I suppose, they were suddenly separated by harpazo, whence they were mixed or dissolved into contemporary neighboring peoples. The same fate befell the families of Shem and Japheth in the Holy Land as that which struck the tower-building Hamites in Haran. You'll have to read the book to get all the details on this. I can't get into it right now. The reception of an Edenic family occurred amongst peoples whom at times were not of themselves related. Flag A. Does that remind you of a criticism from Driver? How he said these people can't be related to these? And likewise, this is a Semitic people, whereas these are Egyptian. There's no relation. This is a serious problem. That's one of the problems Driver raises, and I sort of restate it here myself. Okay, flag A, then moving on. And it was not all peoples of the earth whom absorbed Edenites, hence the inexhaustive compendium of nations listed, flag B. Remember what Driver said? Is this reminding you of some criticism Driver said? He said the table doesn't contain all the nations known to the Hebrews. It's not exhaustive. It can't be explaining where the nations and their languages came from. That's not what it's doing. Remember? A, B, major problems. I didn't put a flag on languages because it just doesn't come up enough in the notes here that I was flagging. You'll see I put A and B flags all along here. Primarily A. These are primarily the two errors the critical scholars make, A and B. The language is a third big boy, and I deal with it here. Now look what Dillman says here. The author does not say that the numerous languages which exist came into existence ready-made at a single stroke. He only fixes the particular point of time from which onward the dividing up into peoples and tongues began. So Dillman thinks the beginning of languages was from the Tower of Babel. There's Dillman making the old-fashioned error. I say in my note here, no formation of new languages occurred. The one lip of the Edenic clan was confounded or mixed into other foreign tongues. It takes two or more to mix. It takes two or more to mix, folks. You know what mix means, right? You know that Babel means mix, right? Babel means mix. Did you know that? By implication, it means mixing. Why? It means pouring two different liquids into a container and they mix together. They mingle. Mix. Mixing. Babel. Mix. That's what Babel's about. It's not about the origin of languages. It's about mixing the Edenic people into the other peoples around. That's what it has to be. Think about it. It's what the Bible's saying to begin with, and look at the problems you're avoiding. Right here, still less is our author responsible for the fancies of the later Jews and of the church fathers, still shared by some, to the effect that Hebrew is the original language, from which the others branched off in consequence of the confusion here related. That's mythical, that's not true. And some have thought the Edenic people must have spoken Hebrew because of the Tetragrammaton. That's a wrong inference. But the right understanding of the tower answers this and much more. Look at what I say here. Correct, Hebrew is not the original Edenic lip, which has been forever lost. The Hebrew Tetragrammaton, however, is the only true representation of the name of the Lord. Yahweh can only be communicated through Hebrew. It can only be comprehended in Hebrew.
Moses says, "May I say who sent me?" He asks for God's name. The Israelites will want to know who has sent me. And God replies with a sentence, Eheye asher eheye. This is a first-person sentence that can be translated, I am who I am, or perhaps I will be who I will be, or perhaps I cause to be what I cause to be. We really don't know, but it has something to do with being. So he asks who God is. God says, I am who I am, or I will cause to be what I will cause to be. So Moses, wisely enough, converts that into a third-person formula. Okay, he will be who he will be. He is who he is. Yahweh, Asher Yahweh. So God's answer to the question of his name is with this sentence. And Moses converts it from a first-person to a third-person sentence. He will be who he will be. He is who he is. He will cause to be. I think most people think now what he will cause to be. And that sentence gets shortened to Yahweh. This is the Bible's explanation for the name Yahweh. And as the personal name of God, some have argued that the name Yahweh expresses the quality of being, an active, dynamic being. This God is one who brings things into being, whether it's a cosmos from chaos or now a new nation from a band of runaway slaves.
And this answers a tremendous question scholars have had.
Now, as we've seen, the biblical sources differ on this point. According to the J source, in Genesis 4:26, the earliest humans worshipped Yahweh as Yahweh. The name was always known. J wants to assert a direct continuity between the God of the patriarchs and the God of the Exodus. The P and E sources tell it a little differently. Exodus 6, verses 2 to 4, very important passage. Exodus 6, verses 2 to 4. It's assigned to P. And here God says, I am Yahweh. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name, Yahweh. Now this contradicts the J source.
Folks, this answers Exodus 6:3, and if you're in the know, you know how important that is.
We are family.
Man, I never got it until I started listening to you, and then once I saw it, I didn't need to listen to you anymore because I could see it myself that it's dead on, and now things that don't make sense just make total sense.